Ian Collins.
On Talk Radio.
And we're talking dentists as well. Back to that shortly. Chris Daw QC, barrister, writer, all-round good bloke is with us. Chris, how are you?
Afternoon, Ian. I'm in good shape. It's good to see you again.
You never come with the wig.
Do you want me to next time?
I think it would be a good thing.
I'll do that for you. What kind of wig are you thinking, Ian?
Well, how many have you got?
My barrister one or the one I wear at weekends?
Oh, that one, yes. I like that one as well. I've seen some of the images on the forums. I
do wig requests, Ian.
Is that when you have do you have a wig made or do you just go and buy one?
Well, my wig is the same one that my mum and dad bought me when I was called to the bar at the age of 23 in 1993.
Gotcha.
And the answer is that they are off the peg. They are not bespoke.
Are they not?
So I have extra large.
Gotcha. Isn't there a legal shop over the way?
There's loads of them, yeah. So Stanley Lee, plug for a big legal
the Spider-Man guy.
Any of your listeners want legal wear? Yeah, Stanley Lee. Yeah. You can get a Spider-Man costume or a barrister outfit.
Yes, this is my barrister, Spider-Man. I wonder
if I should try that in the Court of Appeal sometime.
That would be interesting.
Distract from the evidence.
Yeah, exactly. Are you expected then? Do you like it? Is that, if you're in a case, you have to wear a wig?
You have to wear a wig in the Crown Court and the Court of Appeal, not in the Magistrates' Court. They don't wear wigs in the Magistrates' Court. And county courts, it's a mixture. Sometimes yes, sometimes no.
If you decided to represent yourself in something...
Yeah, you can't wear the gear. No, yeah.
Why? That's discrimination, isn't it?
You're going to get yourself charged with a crime just so you can dress up like a barrister, Ian.
It would be fantastic, wouldn't it?
It's pathetic.
It would be hilarious.
Barrister love that you have every time.
Would the honourable man like to explain to me why? Yes, I could do some of that.
Yeah, the honourable men are the MPs, Ian. You're not even got the right.
I haven't even got the terminology. That's why I didn't do that for a living, isn't it? What do you call the judge?
Learned friend.
The judge is your honour, right?
Of course, or my lord, depending.
Or my lord.
Or my lady, of course.
If they're a lord.
No, not if they're a lord. No. Okay. High Court judges are always my lord, even though they're not lords. And it's very confusing.
Well, that's just nicking titles, isn't
it? You could argue that. And good luck. You go along to the High Court and you tell them that they're not allowed to use that title.
I do not recognise you as a judge.
You'd be held in contempt and you'd be in the cells within about 4 minutes of getting on your feet.
I really like judges, and I kind of I'm a defender of judges in this. You know, when people go, "Oh, look, the judge really old and he's half asleep," and of course you know this better than me, Chris. Most of these guys are incredibly astute. They're right across it. When you think they're not listening, they absolutely are. They're following every.
Yeah, and sometimes they are actually asleep as well. But
there are cases of that.
The majority of the time
generally
they're awake. And there are judges now being appointed in their 30s and early 40s, so this image that all judges are kind of, ancient is
you should be, no, I don't agree with the 30s and the 40s. You should be 86 plus 86 before minimum. You can be a judge.
Okay.
That's what I want to see. Okay. Like the judges in the old Carry On movies.
I quite like the idea of if I lived to 86 that I could become a judge and just be grumpy. And
would you want to cross that line to
No, not really. No, do you know what? Being a barrister is not really a proper job because we're all self-employed and we've never had an actual boss and we've never actually had to go to an office at a certain time.
Yeah.
And, I'm not sure I could get used to it. Judges, it's more like a proper job.
You get paid more as a barrister, don't you?
Well, there is that as well, Ian.
I was going to say that, but
you had to bring that one.
You don't want to be on the PAYE judges.
Not all barristers. Let's not create this myth that we're all fat cats. That's not true. Some of us are. But no, on a serious point, most junior barristers just starting out in criminal law earn, give or take 20 grand a year, and they've spent 50, 60 grand getting there. So the kind of the stereotypes that we're all living in mansions in, it's not entirely accurate.
Not entirely true. Let's look at some legal stories, which is why we like having Chris in, because we can look at some of the legal stories that have been around. Top of the headlines, of course. It shouldn't be top of the headlines because there are more important stories. But, when a footballer decides to use his cat as football practice, then there's clearly a story there. I mean, I'm bound to. Would you defend him?
Well, of course. I mean, that's my job, to defend people who are accused of
How would you defend that?
Well, I think I'd be looking at the video, which sadly I had to watch on the way here because I knew we were going to talk about it. But looking at the video, I think I'd be advising him to plead guilty.
Yeah.
Because,
which he has, to be fair.
Well, he's certainly admitted that he did wrong.
Yeah.
Or someone's written a statement on his behalf, I imagine, saying that they acknowledge. Yeah, I read the statement, and I thought, you know what, that sounds exactly the sort of thing a footballer would say.
That management that takes 20% of his fee every week, which is a lot of money.
At all.
But he said he loves his cats. These cats are about $2,000 a piece. They're not normal cats.
Well, I doubt if he'll get them back. I hope he doesn't get them back. They've been taken away by the RSPCA. But do you know what the interesting thing is about this story for me is it's all about money in football, isn't it? Because we're just seeing the sponsors of West Ham wading in, saying we're going to pull the plug on the club. Yep. And I think they paid 30 million for him. And there comes a point at which they're going to have to make a judgment as to...
Somebody in the ballroom will have the abacus out, won't they?
Working it out.
Going,
if we drop him, what's that?
Adidas have gone, Vitality have gone, and I think a lot of them have suspended it rather than fully pulled out, but it's still not a great look.
It isn't a great look, and ultimately, of course, in the grand scheme of sort of crimes, it's horrible to watch, and it's a very nasty thing to do, but in the end, it wouldn't result in a particularly serious penalty if it was taken to the magistrates' court with charges. But it could cost him his whole career if the economics go in that direction. If the sponsors pull the plug and the club effectively thinks they've got no choice, we've got to get rid of him because otherwise we're going to suffer more damage in the long term, then he'll be gone.
He'll be playing for Scunthorpe United within about 3 years. It's as simple as that. Just on that, but just remind us, Chris, about the obligations of a defence barrister then. So if somebody accused of, I don't know, a serial killer, we'll come on to something similar to that in a second, comes to you and says, look, I did it, but I want to plead not guilty. Am I right in saying you then have to step in and say,
we have an overriding duty not to mislead the court. So knowingly mislead the court. So if you were charged with a crime, Ian, and you came and said, look, Chris, I did it, but I know you're really good and you can get me off, I wouldn't be able to do that. I'd have to say, look, Ian, if you want to plead not guilty, you're going to have to find someone else.
Gotcha.
I can't tell anyone, obviously, because what you tell me is confidential.
So you could then defend them of them pleading guilty.
Of course, yes,
but would. So you'd be looking at circumstances
mitigation
around it.
and trying to get the most favourable sentence. Yeah, absolutely. But no, it's interesting. In the 28 years plus that I've been doing this job, I've never had a client say that to me. I've never once had a client say, I'm guilty, but I want you to get me off anyway.
But have you ever thought they were guilty?
Oh, well, frequently, of course. But that's but that's just my personal kind of view. But just
you're there to test the law, right?
Yeah, I'm not. Well, I'm not there to act on my personal opinions. Otherwise, no one would have a lawyer, would they? Because if we just relied on lawyers to use their own personal opinion about everything, well, we wouldn't need a legal system. We'd just have all the lawyers finding people guilty, and that would be that. So no, my job is very clear. Fearlessly defend my clients to the best of my ability within the law.
You wonder. Let's look at this case as well. This was the case of Ian Stewart. This is a pretty grim case. So this is the man who murdered a children's author. I think his wife at the time, has been convicted of killing his wife 6 years earlier. So he was found guilty of murdering Diana Stewart. Was it his wife?
I think it was his partner. I'm not sure they were married.
Yes. He was found guilty of murdering Diana Stewart at their home in Cambridgeshire. Her death had been treated as an epilepsy-related death until he murdered his fiancée, Helen Bailey, and dumped her body in a cesspit at their Hertfordshire home. Mr. Justice Bryan sentenced Stewart to a whole life order, meaning he will never be released from prison. So I think I've got this right. He was already serving a minimum of 34 years.
Yes.
So he wasn't coming out anyway, this guy.
No time soon, that's for sure.
How old is he now? Can we find out how old he is? I think he's probably in his 60s.
Or so.
61. So he's 61 now. So he was probably never going to see the light of day. So to him, this doesn't make much difference. But it's a horrific story.
Yeah, and I think it's testament to good work by the police in this case, if you think about it, the second time round anyway, because, having achieved the conviction in relation to the later murder, to then actually, think, well, let's go and look back at what happened 6 years before, and not only look into it, but find enough evidence to prove that he was guilty of that first
6
murder.
years later.
Must have been incredibly difficult, and I'm sure that there was an awful lot of very clever police work that went into it. But you're right, in the grand scheme of things, he if he was ever going to be released, he would have been in his 80s stroke 90s anyway.
Yes.
But now he'll be in prison however long he lives.
And that's quite unusual, right? A whole life order.
Yeah, well, it's becoming more common now. So it used to get one or two a year, but we're getting them popping up every few weeks now.
Because we've discussed a couple.
We have, and there's been guidance around it to increase the number of whole life sentences. It's not a trend that I'm massively in favour of myself, because we've seen in the US what happens when you increase the number of whole life sentences, what they call life without parole in America, and now they have 60,000 Americans who will never be released from prison. It's a fairly decent sized town full. We've only still got fewer than 100 in total in Britain, but the direction of travel is in favour of more and more, and we'll just end up with this army of kind of octogenarians and even older, perhaps 100-year-old prisoners. That really you have to question whether there's any real sense in that. What does that do for our society to have people locked up at the age of 100?
But here's the thing, my learned friend. As much as we love you, Chris, if I've got this right, you wouldn't be putting this man in prison at all.
No, that's not the case. My argument has always been that people should only be in prison for so long as it's necessary to protect the public. So if this person were to remain a danger to the public, and particularly to a danger to women and to murdering women, then he would have to be in secure conditions. What I wouldn't do is have the sort of Victorian prisons that we have now, where actually they just process people through, and whether they come out or they don't come out, they're worse people at the end of the process than they were at the beginning.
So this guy, I mean, I'm going to take a punt here, we will never know, but I would imagine he probably is still a danger.
Well, exactly, he probably is. He's a double murderer, and a double murderer of women who's used, particularly, gruesome methods to cover up his crimes, and he's managed to persuade the authorities in the first case for many years that it wasn't a murder at all. So I'm sure he does, but will he still be a danger to the public when he's 78, 85, 94, 103? I mean, that's the problem for me with whole life orders. One of the interesting things recently, the Pope has come out and said that all prisoners should have the possibility of redemption, even when they've done the most awful things. And I think
have you been advising the Pope, Chris?
He hasn't called me yet.
Your papal connections, I understand, are quite good. But you're right, he's a plea on behalf of prison inmates saying they should never be deprived of hope and always be given the opportunity to redeem themselves. Well, most are given that opportunity, aren't they?
Well, most are. Well, I'm not sure I would agree with that. I think the problem is that most are treated by the system in such a way that they have no hope of redemption when they come out. They have no hope of living a law-abiding life because they've basically been programmed by the system we have into criminal ways of thinking and criminal ways of behaving. And, they just come out of prison and they have no life skills. They have no, not even most of them anywhere to live. And so, unsurprisingly, the sorts of opportunities for redemption that you would hope for are just not there.
We'll come back with more from Chris Daw in a few moments' time with us here on Talk Radio.
Talk Radio. Powered by common sense. Activated by opinion. Bristling with debate. First, fast, freedom of opinion.
Unbelievably realistic.
All because the nation loves Talk Radio.
We've just been having one of those Netflix conversations during the break. Chris Daw, the barrister and writer, is with us because Netflix does throw up these real life kind of crime things. Making a Murderer was, I would suggest that's really where it all started, wasn't it? Making a Murderer. That's where everybody went. Have you seen this thing called Making a Murderer? And it is so darn compelling. I mean, the second season of it was still interesting, where there was a lawyer. What's happened to that case now? Because she was really convinced, wasn't she, that there was so many elements of this story that was not attended to properly, a lousy police investigation, coercion from the old... It was
a fascinating case because, of course, the prosecutor then ended up being prosecuted for stuff, it was an extraordinary piece of television. I mean, for those of your listeners who haven't watched it yet, but when the verdict comes in at the end of that first season, I've never seen anything apart from real life verdicts that I've been involved in my own trials. I've never seen anything quite like it. It was extraordinary.
So even as a barrister, a seasoned barrister, you've seen people sent to jail for their life, and it was still powerful to you to see.
So the verdict moment in a criminal trial, I imagine anyone who's listening who's been on jury service, who has been through a trial, but certainly for me, having been through hundreds of trials, it never loses that sense of compelling drama because you get a tannoy that says all parties in the case of Smith come to court 7, and you go and I sit and I always sit, because I always defend, I sit next to the jury in court, so I'm sitting right next to the jury, and the foreman could be 3 or 4 feet away, and when they ask, you find the defendant guilty or not guilty, my stomach goes butterflies and my whole body kind of becomes paralysed. It's just so dramatic, and
I covered when I first sort of started in this business, working at the state-funded broadcaster locally, and I used to go down to Maidstone Crown Court a fair bit, and those moments were absolutely horrifying. I would be almost shaking.
Yeah,
I was quite young as well, and watching somebody go to jail for 17, 18 years or something.
Well, it's the binary nature of it, isn't it? It's absolute. So I've been in, as you say, in cases, murder cases and so on.
Yeah.
You either go out of the front door to the pub, or you go down the steps, and you may not see the light of day ever again. And the difference between those two outcomes is so extraordinary. Yeah. That's where the drama comes from.
This came in from Chris in North Wales, who said, could you ask your barrister friend about the crime number 602-9679/21? Do you know what this is about without me even telling you?
No idea.
Lodged with the Hammersmith Police referencing the mishandling of the illegal activities involved in COVID pandemic. This is an active investigation, says Chris. Thank you. I do know it's not an active investigation, and I do know that getting a crime number doesn't really mean anything, but it's been taken by some people to believe and then go and visit other police stations and serving papers on them as common law constables and the like.
Yes, I mean, it's just, it's a bit of a gimmick, isn't it? I mean, I remember when people were trying to privately prosecute Tony Blair for war crimes and issuing private prosecutions, and I think Boris Johnson actually had a private prosecution issued against him at one stage.
But what's happened here, I think, is somebody went along to a police station, and at some point, clearly on a day when whoever was working in on the front desk, which is invariably a civil position these days, but sometimes it's an officer, somebody gave somebody a crime number. But that just means you've reported something.
Yeah,
right? If I had my bike nicked, I'd get a crime number, whether there was any evidence for my bike being nicked or not.
Absolutely, yeah. It's just an absolute standard process, yeah.
So, and I know it's not an active investigation, but lots of people seem to think it is, and then they're using this to go to other police stations and serve papers on officers, and suggesting that a vaccination centre is a crime scene. We could close this down.
Lots of people try and use the criminal process, whether it's through the police or the courts, for publicity stunts, and it never lasts very long.
Let's just have a look at this story. Serious Fraud Office under investigation over bribery case. The Attorney General has brought in a former High Court judge to investigate serious failures by the SFO, that's the Serious Fraud Office, in a case that led to the quashing of a bribery conviction. So this is Sir David Calvert-Smith, who's also the former Director of Public Prosecutions, will lead an independent review after the Court of Appeal overturned the conviction of a former oil and gas exec last year following backroom talks with Lisa Osowski, Chief Exec of the Serious Fraud Office, held with a fixer. So it's quite convoluted.
It is. So let's just sort of try and simplify things. Lisa Osowski was brought in from America. She's an American, and she was brought in to run the Serious Fraud Office in Britain a few years back. And it sounds like she's been behaving more like someone in the FBI, going around kind of trying to do clever deals to bring people to justice. And what the Court of Appeal have said is that the organisation that's responsible for the most serious fraud investigations in our country itself behaves so badly and so illegally that they've had to throw out a prosecution that was brought by the SFO. And that's at a period in our history when fraud is off the chart. We have record levels of fraud, and these major cases are being thrown out because of misconduct by the SFO itself.
So almost people acting in a kind of what was the old cop series that went back to the 1970s?
Life on Mars.
Life on Mars.
Yeah.
Kind of that, the Sweeney, meeting people in bars and cutting deals. And
it's ludicrous because unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, prosecutors have obligations in Britain to make complete disclosure of anything that might be relevant to the case, and they just can't withhold information about these sorts of contacts. And the Court of Appeal have said that's exactly what happened here. So it's really, for those of people listening, many thousands of people are victims of fraud all the time. Will be asking themselves, why on earth is this so-called Serious Fraud Office not just getting on with trying to crack some of the fraud that affects us every day, credit card fraud and all the other things that are so rife in our country?
We've almost hit the clock. We're just a final thing. We're talking about dentists. as well. When was the last time you went to a dentist? Because lots of people can't get to see
I
them.
went to the dentist within the last 12 months.
You've got a good set of gnashers by the looks of things.
Yeah, they're not too bad. I was wondering if you'd had the white veneers, celebrity veneers done.
I haven't.
I was asking him. Oh, I don't know. They look pretty white to me.
I've got nice. I've always had pretty good.
Just natural beauty that you bring with you every
Jeremy
day.
Kyle has veneers, and we can say that because he says it himself.
Yeah, well, of course he does.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone would have doubted it, would they?
But he had them because he went to do the Jeremy Kyle show in America.
Yeah,
and
they wouldn't have him without white teeth.
Correct. So they actually said to him, "Sorry, sir, that's not going to happen," and took him off to a dentist.
Well, after this, I think you could be recruited by the Americans because your teeth do look spectacular.
I wouldn't say they're spectacular.
Pristine. Ian.
Dan Wood was a man with white teeth, wasn't he? I mean, they were all his own, apparently. Yeah. Chris, that is it. Thank you. We will see you again in a few weeks' time.
We will.
Chris Daw, barrister, QC, writer. I would say barrister, QC as if they're two different things. They can be two different things, can't they?
They are two different things.
You can be a barrister without
QCs are the elite form of barrister.
Yeah, so you're top of the tree. There's nowhere to go now, is there? Really?
Not really.
The judge job. I told you the judge job.
The moon.
Do you want me to get some application forms for you?
No, you're all right.
Let's go to can we go to the Home Office website and just vacancies?
I'm not doing it. I don't want to do it.
Next time Chris comes on, it'll be Judge Daw with us here on the programme. Thank you to Chris. Back with more from you in a few moments' time. It's 3:30. News headlines coming next.